Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Pehchaan, where we unpack the stories and identities of extraordinary Pakistani Americans. Today, I've got a very special guest with me. Raza Rumi is a man who needs no introduction. He is a thinker who speaks from the heart. He's a man of many different professional and personal identities, and today we're going to try to peel them like an onion and get to the bottom of it and try not to cry at the end of it as well. He is a journalist, an author, a culture maker, and his move to America was actually also as a result of a very dramatic moment where he survived an assassination attempt and then made his way here. And now he lives away from home. So we're going to try to understand what it means to be away from home, what is his pehchan, and what are all the different identities that make up the man behind Raza Rumi. So Raza, first of all, thank you so much for making time for us and being here today.
Thank you, Bilal. My pleasure, as always, to converse with you. And thanks for inviting me. Your initiative is great, and I hope we can have a good conversation in the coming next hour or so.
Absolutely. So, Raza, I'm going to begin with perhaps what might be the most dramatic moment in your life. This is when you survived an assassination attempt in Lahore. Your driver unfortunately passed away in that attack. Talk to me a little bit about what was happening that night, and then how that resulted in your eventual move to America. So, talk to me a little bit about the background and what happened that night.
Thank you, Bilal. Of course, this is somewhat old of an event, but I mean, almost more than 9 years ago. And certainly, I mean, I would say it was certainly the most traumatic. I mean, there have been other dramatic moments in my life, and I hope there are more because without drama, life can be rather dull. But this certainly was most traumatic. An event that obviously changed my life and where I was, as you rightly said, about, moving out of Pakistan. This was in March 2014. And, in those days, I had a regular TV show with a news channel in Pakistan. And I'd finished my show and was going home, along with my driver. And there was another person, whom I'd hired as a guard given the threats that I was apprised of. And so I faced this, complete surprise attack on a dark corner, from a main highway, a main sort of artery in Lahore, Firozpur Road. You turn into towards the market that leads to my house. And at that corner, not too far from my house, not too far from my workplace, these unknown assailants. I mean, later they were identified. They just sprayed bullets, as the car slowed down, hitting the person who was driving the car right away. And obviously, I've read about it as well, and it's documented. And I'm kind of I still remember all the details. It was such an important and tragic moment. And, I saw that young man die in front of me. And, I was by complete miraculous, reasons, I was unharmed because I was at the back seat. And the moment I heard the noise of gunfire, I ducked and, ducked under and lay on the floor of the car until all of this was over. And I wasn't even sure it was over or not. And, all the car's windows had smashed and they were like, they had put layers on me. And then, his driver's blood was sort of had been trickling from the driver's seat towards the back of the car. And I first thought I was shot, so because I was drenched in one part of my shirt was drenched in blood. And then, of course, later on, I discovered that it was not my blood, but, and so on and so forth. So anyway, I stayed in Pakistan for a couple of weeks after that. And, the police told me that, don't leave your house. You should stay indoors for a couple of months. And these people until we find them. They may come for you again, blah, blah, blah. So obviously, I wasn't really sure what to do because, there's always a footprint of the state in such activities, as nothing has changed in the last decade or so. Even today, a lot of people who have gone missing or are attacked complain of some level of state complicity. So that was my confusion at that time, and then I have two kids who were really young at that time. So my other concern was that okay, I may live or die or whatever, but if my children are with me in such a situation, and I just shuddered to think of the consequences. So um, my two sisters live in the US. They've been living here for
Mm.
ages.
Mm-hmm.
So they were here. So initially I thought, okay, I should come to America and be with my family members and, take a break and then maybe return after this all dies down. And then I came here. That's how I came here, accidentally, totally
Mm.
unprepared, and unaware of what lies ahead. And then, of course, once I arrived in the US, within 2 months or so, the police uh, apparently identified these people who had fired at my car and killed my driver and tried to kill me. And they were from these extremist organizations. I mean, that's what the police identified. And when I heard the names of these organizations, good grief, then I was even more worried. Then I'm like, these organizations are not going to go away anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
what am I going to do? I mean, so in a
Mm-hmm.
way, it was like a really strange dilemma. So so it all how things happen, and it just happened, and then I stayed on. Of course, I stayed on until because then they were identified, and then they were tried, and then we were waiting for the trial. So that took a couple of years, and in the meantime, I had to do something. So I started found new vocation here, and I kind of underwent a career switch and started working for a college in Ithaca, upstate New York, where I started to teach, and I was a scholar in residence. And obviously, I liked that, because I thought that this was a good move in my, midlife
Mm-hmm.
journey, midlife crises
Mm-hmm.
of a serious kind, and so on and so forth. And the rest is history. And then here I am. I mean, I, of course, things did change a bit later on, because in 2015, 16, 17, Pakistan's military took out a lot of hideouts of the so-called militants and militant groups. But physically targeting certain groups of people or eliminating them is easy, but
Mm-hmm.
rooting out the ideology or what
Yeah.
drives people to extremism is a much more complicated process, and that's still a work in progress. In fact, that does not seem to be going anywhere, unfortunately.
Bilkul, bilkul. Well, thank you for sharing that story with us. And it was such an unfortunate incident, but it also sort of put you into a new trajectory in life, one that you didn't plan for, one that you probably didn't even want, which is to move away from home, move all the way thousands of miles away here to the US. But before we continue your story from here, I want to go back in time a little bit. You grew up in Pakistan, you worked for the government of Pakistan, presumably, grew up at a time where patriotism was in its full swing. You absorbed everything that was going in. You're a deep thinker. You think from the heart. What was life like for you growing up? And talk to us about how the Pakistani identity, or which version of the Pakistani identity, you sort of grew up with. Because then I want to get to the point of where you had to leave home, and how difficult that was. So talk to me a little bit about what life was like as a child for Raza growing up, and what kind of identities you were absorbing at that point.
Bilal, that's really interesting and a bit tricky as well, because obviously I'll have to like jog my memory, and I'm not as young as you are.
You're not as old as you think you are either.
So, so it's a couple of quite a few decades away. Well, I mean, yes, as you rightly say, I grew up in Pakistan, in Rawalpindi and then in Lahore. Lahore is my birthplace. So I studied until grade six in Rawalpindi and then we moved to Lahore, my family. And, growing up in Lahore, obviously, was rather pleasurable and memorable, the best years of my life in a way, because that's when you gain all the influences. And Lahore, as you know, is a very I mean, always has been an amazing place. Even now, it is, despite the air pollution and overcrowding and traffic jams. But it's
लाहौर लाहौर है हाँ हाँ
yeah, Lahore. It's a cultural nerve center of Pakistan, and I would say even South Asia, even today. And so it was a very, nice, privileged, but sheltered childhood, as is the case. And but the key thing that I do remember from that time is obviously absorbing a lot of Lahori culture, and Lahori culture in the sense, in a historical context. The ancient place of Lahore, its history, its architecture, its gardens, its seasons, its flowers, its birds, its parks. So they are very much etched into my who I am, actually. So when you talk of identity, whenever I think of, if somebody were to ask me, okay, how do you define yourself? So my initial and primary identity would that be of a Lahori, actually.
ah
So, because it is so rooted in the, because, all these things about identity are very recent, the 19th and 20th century, the idea of nation state and nationalism. So for centuries, people associated with the place where they were born, where they grew up, with,
mhm
what we call the Watan,
mhm
Watan as in home. And Watan could be a nation, could be a town, a village, a neighborhood,
mhm
any area. So it's very much that, if I were to draw a concentric circle, that is at the core of
mm
my identification, because I always think of Lahore. And I think partly it has also become more serious, Bilal, because of the fact that I'm also in permanent exile from Lahore. Because you see, you asked me about my childhood. So after my high school,
mhm
I went off to the UK to
mhm
study at the
mhm
London School of Economics for my undergrad and later for my master's degree. And then I stayed in the UK for many years. These are very formative years. So obviously, London is
mhm
kind of my second law, even though I don't visit that frequently or haven't lived there as such. But but I do. There are familiar streets and familiar
mhm
names, because at age 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, these are very important years of your life, and
yeah
the memories that every place evoke, the parks, etc. So, but then once I finished my education, I did not really go back and live in Lahore, because the moment
mm
I finished my master's degree, I got a job with the Aga Khan Rural Support Program in northern Pakistan, Skardu,
mhm
of today. So
mhm
that's where I spent 2 years in first in Skardu, dramatic, because you used this word earlier.
yeah
There have been dramatic moments when I landed in the northern areas of Pakistan, now Gilgit-Baltistan, it's called
mhm
province. I mean, that was a real drama, eye-opening. I'd never been there before.
mhm
And now it's much more in the news, and people go there as tourists. And those days, even tourism was very limited.
mm
So this was this vast, vistas and dramatic geography and scenery, and of course a sense of isolation and remoteness as well that comes into place. But I stayed there for some time, and that's when during this time, these 2 years, is when I mean, we were not as fortunate as your generation, although I mean I'm not that old as
yeah
as you rightly said, but yes, the younger people now
mhm
in their 20s in Pakistan, or even in their 30s, they have many more opportunities. In our times, we had very set things. You have to be a doctor, an engineer, a civil servant, or a lawyer, whatever. And so I opted for the civil service exam, and I took that exam in 1993, exactly. Oops, 30 years ago. And I took that exam and I topped the exam. So, So earlier I wasn't really sure whether to do it or not. You have all sorts of ideas. But then, as a young, early 20 something kid, I thought, I'd join the service, I'd serve my people, I serve my country. So the patriotism that you were talking about
Mm-hmm.
was also very much ingrained that, you want to do
Mm-hmm.
good for Pakistan and you want to improve the system, quote unquote. So I joined the civil service then. So I did go back to Lahore as an under training
Mm-hmm.
for I to spend almost a year there in for civil service training. But
Mm-hmm.
obviously, we were confined to the civil service academy in Lahore.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, we were in Lahore, but it was a different planet
Yeah.
altogether, as a bureaucracy is. And after that, once again, I was out of Lahore, and since then, I really haven't lived in Lahore as I
Wow.
really wanted to. So part of so that nostalgia and that whole thing is also linked to the fact that you are away from a place that you like and love, and you have the image of a place which has
Yeah.
changed, and Lahore has changed. Now when
Yeah.
I visit,
Mm-hmm.
it's a totally different place. So yeah, so I and then I worked in the government for many years in the field, and then after my that civil service stint, during that stint, I got a chance to get a deputation to the United Nations in mission in Kosovo,
Mm-hmm.
again in the field of municipal administration. So the kind of thing I was already doing in Pakistan. And so those were again. I mean, that was again a very dramatic experience because this was post-war
Yeah.
Balkans, right? After
Mm-hmm.
1999, when it had been bombed and there had been a civil war and all the crises, and so I landed up in Kosovo, and then I was posted into to a southern municipality which borders Macedonia, but the municipality was in ruins because
Mm-hmm.
there was hardly any electricity.
Mm-hmm.
There was the infrastructure had been damaged, and so one of our tasks at that as UN officials was to make the local government work, make services work, rebuild things, hold elections.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, I'm really fortunate that at a very young age, I had that experience, in a different country, and so in a way that whole thing to serve and do good
Yeah.
did come about, and of course that's when I also realized that you work for the UN, you get paid much more. So then yeah, and of course the international exposure you have colleagues from Africa,
Yeah.
Latin America, Asia, Europe, North America. So this was like I was what 29, 30 years old then, and certainly it was again a very very important phase of my life. I mean I always wanted to write about it, but how much can one write in one's life? But so I did that stint, and I could not stay longer in the UN system for a variety of reasons. But most importantly, that that was the time we were expecting our first
Okay.
child and my son, and that was not a family station, and
Mm-hmm.
so I wanted to like be with my family, and so then I moved back to Pakistan, but I moved to Islamabad,
You moved to
and
Islamabad. Okay.
yeah, so
Mm-hmm.
didn't go to Lahore. So
It's
I
like
moved.
वो गायबाना इश्क है आपका प्यार पहला प्यार है जिससे
Oh,
आपकी you
oh,
can't have
that's
a
it.
union with it.
That's it.
वाओ और
Mm.
ये भी इंटरेस्टिंग है कि आप इतने सारे शहरों में इतनी सारी जगहों में रहे हैं एंड इन अ नाइस कंफर्टेबल बबल इन डिफरेंट प्लेसेस यू हैव बीन इन बट जो पहला प्यार है वो इट कीप्स कमिंग बैक टू हॉन्ट यू इन टर्म्स
Yeah.
ऑफ आपने जब से आपकी प्राइमरी आइडेंटिटी आपने अपने आप को एज अ लाहौरी डिफाइन किया व्हिच आई वाजंट एक्सपेक्टिंग बट
Yes.
वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग
Well, I have to give you a surprise. तुम्हें पता ना आजकल तो वीडियोस ही चलती हैं इसके ऊपर, हाँ बड़ा सरप्राइज आ गया.
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल ये तो
Acha,
ब्रेकिंग न्यूज आ
so
गई जी
so
जी
anyways,
हाँ
going back to your question because I want to
हम्म,
relate. Sorry, I have a
हम्म,
habit. So you
नहीं बहुत मजे की
stop
स्टोरी है
me
हाँ
because I can go on and on.
हम्म,
So you asked about how coming to America and how so
हम्म,
identity is I mean a very fluid
Mhm.
concept, number one.
Mhm.
Of course, there are certain core identities, but identity is also something ever changing and ever shifting.
Mhm.
So I got, but so by now I've grown up in Pakistan, studied in the UK, lived there, imbibed a lot of influences from there, and then of course Southern Europe, which was a
Mhm.
completely different experience that
Mhm.
never been to the Balkans in my life.
Mhm.
And during this time, I also explored this part of Europe, so and especially the ruins and the signs of the Ottoman Empire, because,
Mhm.
Balkans were once ruled by the Ottomans.
Mhm.
So even in the town where I was posted, there was every town had a big, beautiful Ottoman mosque. So but then and Kosovo is also majority Muslim, but
Mhm.
they are different kind of Muslims, than
Mhm.
Pakistan
Yeah.
Muslims or Indian
Mhm.
Muslims or and so that was also an eye-opening experience that
Mhm.
not that number one, no identity is fixed or monolithic.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
even when you're a Muslim, and of course,
Mhm.
we grew up in Pakistan from Muslim backgrounds, that's also an ingrained identity.
Mhm.
You're Pakistani, you're Muslim, your society, your caste, your creed, or
Mhm.
whatever. But that is when the idea of Muslimness also, and so I wrote an essay, which is I think in one of my books, I think it is, yeah. So that was also the notion of Muslimness,
Mhm.
So it was, growing up in Pakistan, and then interacting with the Muslims in the UK, and then coming to the Balkans and finding a different creed of Muslims and different history and different trajectory, different language, even different practices. So, I mean,
Mhm.
in the sense, I mean, in Kosovo, alcohol, for example, was not forbidden, right?
Mhm.
So a lot
Mhm.
of people would drink freely. I mean, in those days, I was a very firm practicing Muslim.
Mhm.
So I was like, "Hi, toba toba, ye to sare sharab pee rahe hain." Acha, but the thing
Uh-huh.
is, for them, it was not a big deal. And
Mhm.
then, of course, during this time, then I was very much interested, and it so happened that I also started visiting Turkey because
Mhm.
I had to go to Macedonia via Istanbul. So
Mhm.
every time I had to go to Kosovo, I had to stop in Istanbul, and
Mhm.
perhaps for an entire day, sometimes for a night as well. And that was, remember, pre 9/11
Yeah.
world, and so there was no visa checks. You could get a visa upon arrival
Mhm.
for a day, and
Mhm.
of course, I was in for another culture shock. The beautiful. I mean, first the sheer beauty of Turkey and Istanbul
Yeah.
as a urban center, but also how much of a modern and how much of an inclusive
Mhm.
place it was, and
Mhm.
that was also a surprise because I remember that
Mhm.
there's a famous shrine of Hazrat Ayub Ansari there. Ayub
Mhm.
Ansari, as they call it in
Mhm.
Turkish. And so, I had a friend who was posted there. So, this was my second or third visit. He said, you must
Mhm.
go to this shrine. So he took me
Mhm.
there. And so we went there, we prayed, the way we do Fatiha and everything. And then
Mhm.
we walked out, and you get out of the shrine, and there's a lovely cobbled street, and you walk and you look across, and there's a whole row of Irish pubs. So here's one side where you have these hijab clad women, prayers, call to prayers, and including us, doing all the rites and there's another world, and they are coexisting on the same street. Now that was really, really interesting. It was interesting because it also shows that this is possible in Muslim society.
Mhm.
Can be
Mhm.
tolerant, and in even in Turkey today there are many
Yeah.
Muslims and there are lots of tourists. I mean, Turkey has a huge tourism revenue. I mean, it's been growing and growing, and despite the fact that it's ruled by a soft Islamist
Yeah.
leader, these things continue. And in
Yeah.
Pakistan, whenever we talk of tourism, and you've seen all the platitudes and all the promises, you can't have tourism until you create an inclusive, tolerant,
Yeah.
accepting society. So for me, that particular this was almost 25 or 24 years ago, Bilal. And for me, as a tourist to Turkey, Turkey gave me that particular comfort as a Muslim tourist. Okay, forget about
Fascinating.
other tourists. That if you want to pray in a beautiful Ottoman mosque, you can go and pray. If you want to do other things, you can do that as well.
वैसे on a lighter note, it reminds me Europe के अंदर whenever I used to search for halal food, the best halal food was somehow always inside a red light district. Just on a lighter note, I was like, what are these Arabs
Right.
doing? But anyways, acha,
That's
continue
interesting.
your Turkish
So,
point.
so Bilal, so what I'm trying to say is that so that's what really made me think. And this was, and thereafter, shortly thereafter, I returned to Pakistan. After my Balkans thing, and then came to Islamabad, got a job in Asian Development Bank. So joined them in Islamabad first, worked there for a couple of years, then was got a job in the headquarters in the Philippines, East Asia, another place I'd never been to.
Mhm.
And the next few years were a great exploration because for work, I traveled across Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, I mean, you name it, and all the countries of South Asia, including India. Now, I'd been to India once as a student,
Mhm.
but now I had to go for work. And obviously, going to India as a Muslim Pakistani, as the enemy, quote unquote,
Mhm.
was another eye-opening experience.
Mhm.
Eye-opening because in the sense that, you already have a lot of stereotypes about Indians. They have
Mhm.
stereotypes about us, Pakistanis are like this and we say Indians are like that and
Mhm.
blah, blah, blah. But, I went there and I realized that, a lot of these identity issues that are ingrained in our consciousness are so manufactured because, they were in India, one realizes when one travels across the region that really all these this Indian identity, Pakistani identity are kind of uh, you know the word I want to use is manufactured, but that will be too strong. But they are kind of
AstroTurf पे हैं,
yeah,
they built an AstroTurf. Yeah.
they've been crafted for a particular service to nationalism.
Mhm.
And nationalism, and now there was a big debate in India in the 20th century, like Tagore, Rabindranath Tagore, for example,
Mhm.
said that he was a great opponent of nationalism. He thought that
Mhm.
nationalism made people limited, urged them to fight and become violent, and robbed the notion of humanity.
Mhm.
So, if you think that I'm a human being, you're a human being, and, a non-Pakistani, a non-Muslim, a
Mhm.
non-brown
Mhm.
person can
Mhm.
is as human as us, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that particular bond of humanity and all of that.
Mhm.
So this was a time in my 30s when I was thinking
Mhm.
about these things,
Mhm.
and gradually, uh, not just thinking, but also experiencing these different encounters,
Mhm.
and even as what is it? What does it mean to be a Muslim? What does it mean to be a Pakistani? What does it mean to be a global
Mhm.
citizen, a human
Mhm.
being, and all of that? An expat.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
expat was also so
Yeah.
again I had like multiple identities. I was an expat in the Philippines. I was a
Mhm.
Pakistani origin. I was a Lahori. I was a Muslim.
Mhm.
I was an enemy. We're traveling in an enemy country in India, and so
Mhm.
that resulted in my first book, Delhi by
Mhm.
Heart,
Mhm.
which was
Which I
published
read, and it's a
a
beautiful book.
decade year,
Mhm.
uh,
Mhm.
a decade ago, exactly. But it was the work in the making for many years before that. So my book explores some of these questions,
Mhm.
not directly, not
Mhm.
that's not the only focus of the book,
Mhm.
but it does raise a lot of these questions that you asked. Now we can come to America. I mean, there's a lot more that we can talk about later. So, yeah,
हम्म।
go on.
अच्छा एक सेकंड, आप अमेरिका में आने के पहले आपने बहुत ही इंटरेस्टिंग बात छेड़ी अबाउट क्राफ्टेड आइडेंटिटीज, मैन्युफैक्चर्ड आइडेंटिटीज, एंड बिकॉज यू डन सच डीप थिंकिंग ऑन दिस, मुझे बताएं कि फिर आइडेंटिटी का फ़ायदा क्या होता है? आइडेंटिटी के पीछे इंसानी फितरत, व्हाई डज वांट टू आइडेंटिफाई एज एनीथिंग फॉर दैट मैटर, क्यों एक एक इश्क होता है विद फाइंडिंग योर ओन और विद फाइंडिंग एन आइडेंटिटी और अ कम्युनिटी? ये इसकी एडवांटेज क्या है? इसकी डिसएडवांटेज तो क्लियर है, व्हेन इट गेट्स क्राफ्टेड, मैन्युफैक्चर्ड, इट्स नेशनलिस्टिक, पीपल फाइट, people go to war, लेकिन इसका फितरतन, like at a human level, why do we crave an identity?
Yeah, so I think that's a very good question, and not a easy question to answer. By the way, let me also
Mm-hmm.
add, because I think of course, the sense of community is very important, because
Mm-hmm.
we obviously exist in groups. We
Mm-hmm.
obviously need, the one of the primal needs of human beings, since the time we were living in caves, our great ancestors, was identification. And the need to be understood. And then, before even humans learned how to speak, they were communicating, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there was this, our need to be understood is one of the vital needs.
Mm-hmm.
That's why you seek a community. फायदा वो
Mm-hmm.
होता है
Yeah.
कि, your community, your people around you, or in the area or country or nation you're living in, they help you in being recognized
Mm-hmm.
to your fullest. And secondly, they also understand you. So,
Mm-hmm.
we are switching in these two
Yeah.
languages, Bilal, you and
Mm-hmm.
I. So we have a far greater advantage of
Mm-hmm.
being understood by each
Mm-hmm.
other than,
Mm-hmm.
let's say, if you have a white person in
Mm-hmm.
my
Yeah.
place. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that would diminish the quality of what they have to say. But
Mm-hmm.
our communication is going to be much easier, and we'll probably understand the nuances of our culture. But then
Mm-hmm.
other things also are important, like cuisine, for example. So you were talking about halal food. I mean, that's what I
Yeah.
always do.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing is, where is the
Mm-hmm.
grocery store where I can find the spices, where
Yeah.
will I find halal meat,
Mm-hmm.
because it tastes different.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than
Mm-hmm.
the religious obligation
Yeah.
that we have,
Yeah.
it tastes much better, far
Mm-hmm.
better, and I,
Yeah.
or kosher for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the things that we always find, and we want them
Mm-hmm.
because they are
Mm-hmm.
they are part of who we are.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope I've addressed your question.
Yeah. No, that's fascinating. अच्छा अब हम let's come to where you were on the story. So अब आप अमेरिका आ गए, and you were going to talk about, you made it sound initially as if, one thing led to another. आप अपनी बहनों से मिलने आए थे, and then, you got into Ithaca, and then you just sort of stayed. But at what point did you make a decision कि was the Ithaca initially कि अच्छा मैं साल इधर गुजारूंगा और फिर मैं देखूंगा क्या करना है, या at what point did you make a conscious decision, or perhaps you still haven't, कि अच्छा अब मैं इधर ही हूँ for the foreseeable future?
So that's a good question. Honestly, to be honest, the rush of events has been such. Actually, I'm writing about this, Bilal. It's my
Mm-hmm.
next book is going to be a
Oh.
memoir about this particular phase of moving here and living here, and my life as an immigrant. So in a way, maybe I'll watch this
I
podcast.
hope this podcast comes out before your
Yeah,
book.
look, it will come out before my book. My book is nowhere to be, nowhere complete. It's gonna take maybe a year or less than a year. So Bilal, the thing is that I at the point when I decided was that when these guys, six of them were named by the police as those who were trying to set out to kill me,
Mm-hmm.
they belong to two most dangerous organizations, militant organizations in Pakistan, okay? And I'll be very frank with you, it is not just those organizations, but the fact that the ties they had to the Pakistani deep state.
Mm-hmm.
So that is what alarmed. And
Mm-hmm.
that is what seriously alarmed me. And that is when I then so this was within the first year of coming of being here. So in the
Mm-hmm.
first year, luckily, I got a short stint at USIP, uh,
Mm-hmm.
United States Institute of Peace, and where I was a senior expert in residence.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote a long paper there, did some research, and came up with the project. So when I was there, during that time, all of this came to light. And then I started talking to my family, my friends. I did have colleagues from the civil service. I did have colleagues from my other jobs, my other,
Mm-hmm.
past lives.
Mm-hmm.
And the majority of them were were just so. So this was, I think, I can even give you the specific time. So this was somewhere in January of 2015,
Mm-hmm.
or that I was talking to people and doing Skype calls and etc. And the overwhelming majority of them said that, "Are you mad that you want to come back? Why these organizations that have been named?
Yeah.
It was their view that
Mm-hmm.
these organizations have been at some point or of their existence, sponsored by the either the intelligence agencies or the police itself or the state
Mm-hmm.
or political parties, etc., etc. And so that's what made me think, and that's
Mm-hmm.
what I said that if I were to, so that was one. The
Mm-hmm.
second was that so now I'm talking about it very calmly, and I can laugh as well. I mean, in a sardonic manner as to what happened to me. In those days, I was deeply traumatized. So I had
Mm-hmm.
huge PTSD,
Mm-hmm.
symptoms, problems with sleeping. If you sleep, you have all these dreams, you have all these anxiety
Wow.
hidden away,
Mm-hmm.
sort of all sorts of nervous wreck type
Mm-hmm.
behavior. And I had not started my therapy either because I
Mm-hmm.
was, like a typical Pakistani
Yeah.
mind. I'm like, okay, I'll overcome and I'll do this,
Mm-hmm.
go for a walk and I'll do a bit of
Yeah.
exercise and eat well and listen to music. And
नमाज पढ़ लेंगे हाँ हाँ
नमाज भी पढ़ी बिल्कुल नवाफिल पढ़े और ये और वो. But so I was really traumatized, and the moral burden. So in those years, for many years, I kept on blaming myself for the death of my driver. Now, my
Mhm,
driver's life story also merits a little bit of discussion here
mhm,
because he was a 25-year-old young man, 24, 25. He had gotten married less than a year ago with a
wow.
young wife, and he was such an integral part of my family life, of my life. He was used to play with my children.
Mhm,
He was not just a driver in the sense, he was also like a glorified, I don't know, personal assistant. He could
mhm,
pay my bills and, keep my
mhm,
checkbooks and all of that. And
mhm,
would know where, which paper has to be delivered there, etc., etc.
mhm,
So in a way, it was very central to my existence. And
mhm,
in those days, I used to live in Islamabad and Lahore simultaneously. I was based in Islamabad with the Jinnah Institute and
mhm,
with later a non-profit called Insaf Network,
mhm.
not Tariq Insaf. Okay, so so Insaf Network is a group of civil society organizations. It has another name, and and then I used to come to Lahore for my TV show three
Mhm,
times or whatever, 4 times a week. And so with him, so I blamed myself incessantly. And I said
mhm,
that, had I not said this on TV, had I checked my positions, this would have not happened.
mm,
I had to leave my home because of this, and Bilal, this was the time. So you've heard about my multiple careers, in the government, in the Asian
mhm.
Development Bank,
Yeah.
the United Nations, and remember, and mind you, they all are careers people aspire for. People
Mhm,
want to win the civil service, so I got it. I left it. Okay, people want to go into international civil service like the World Bank or the ADB. Uh, I was there. I did left it. People want to be in the UN, and primarily to pursue my passion
mhm,
to write, to
mhm,
speak, to engage in the public arena, in the public sphere, to
mhm,
write books, for example, without any censorship, without any approval processes, bosses, this and that. So
mhm,
in a way, by 2013,
mhm,
at a relative young age, I would say I'd crossed 40, but I had, I had achieved what I had aspired for,
mhm,
So
mhm,
guess what I was doing at that juncture of my life? I was part of a think tank. I
mhm,
was an editor of the Friday Times. I
mhm,
was a TV anchor. I was a published author. I was a
mhm.
columnist in 2 publications. And
Yeah.
I was also a development consultant.
Mhm,
So, and I had a life in Lahore and Islamabad, capital, and my favorite place, Lahore.
mhm,
And so, in a way, my professional goals,
mhm.
I had achieved them. Now,
Yeah.
you achieve them and you're like, oh, wow, I've made it.
Mhm,
Great. Thank Allah,
mhm,
supreme nature, whatever. And suddenly, all of that comes crashing down, in a jiffy, in a split second, in March of 2014. So after all these years, and, mind you, I started working, my professional life started when I was 22. And so I'd been working non-stop. And while now I had increased my portfolio, I was doing multiple things, multiple jobs. So, 2 days in a week, this and weekends for this and that. I
Mhm.
still do that. I've become a workaholic since then. But I had the most, and I was in the Philippines. So I'd left that international job and come to Pakistan because I wanted to be in Pakistan. Well, partly because of the family at that particular juncture, but partly because I thought here is a place where I
Yeah.
need to engage with, right?
Mhm.
And suddenly you have to leave. So there's a dead body that you picked up. There's
Mhm.
a home you leave out, and then once you build. So I had two homes in Lahore and Islamabad, and I am a person who believes in homes, and so Bilal, this was very traumatic. And so when I was talking to people, and they said you're doing this, so in a way that also influenced me, that also scared me, and
Mm.
there was this moral pressure. So I met our great religious scholar Ghamidi Saab.
Mhm.
I think it was in 2015 in DC
Mhm.
had come, and I knew one of his followers is a old friend of mine, and he took me
Mhm.
to meet him. And Ghamidi Saab told me, he said, I totally understand. He said, akhlaqi dabaw hota hai, moral pressure.
Mhm.
That,
Mhm.
that because of you, somebody might come in harm's way. Because,
Mhm.
and of course, I'm hardly a nobody compared to Ghamidi Saab. But so in those
Mhm.
days, Ghamidi Saab had also left for Pakistan,
Yeah.
Malaysia, and he was relating his experience, and he said, I totally understand, and what you've done is correct.
Mhm.
So that's when I said, okay, let's give it more time, maybe things will change.
Mhm.
Now you give it more time, then you undergo visa change and new job. I said, okay, so in 2015 was also the time when I got this gig at Ithaca College for 2 years. I didn't know where Ithaca was, to be honest.
Mhm.
So I went to this time. That was exactly 8 years ago. Yeah,
Mhm.
or yeah, 8 9 years ago. And I went to Ithaca, and it was such a beautiful, pristine, glorious place.
Mhm.
This beautiful campus and the opportunity. For me, I thought at this juncture of my life, if I have to be in America, I can't be with a think tank. Being with a
Mhm.
think tank is just too limited, and
Mhm.
you end up articulating the position of the U.S. government or U.S. military because they are the ones who sponsor these think tanks. And fair enough,
Mhm.
you have to take the
Mhm.
official line, quote unquote. There are very few
Mhm.
think tanks that can take a critical line.
Mhm.
Uh, you know, I did not want to go back to the World Bank. I mean, that was something I could have like applied and chased because I had a whole decade of
Mhm.
ADB experience. So I
Mhm.
said, okay, what is a good place where I can sort of, write, I can relax, I can uh, stimulate my brain and do some kind of public service. And I thought
Mhm.
education, I'd always believed, and I still believe, I think it is the most important. If you influence two people in your life,
Mhm.
now, you know,
Yeah.
so, when I'm dying, and if I have changed uh, the way 10 people think or view the world or write, I would have achieved my goals in life.
Mhm. Mhm.
All other things are secondary and nonsensical, money and
Yeah.
capital or whatever. We all aim
Mhm.
to do
Mhm.
that and accumulate that. But at the end of the day, the real satisfaction comes when you believe that you have made an impact on somebody's life
Yeah.
or for good. So
Mhm.
that is when I started exploring the possibility of living in the United States on a more permanent basis. Yeah.
Wow. मुझे अभी तक एक चीज शेक कर रही है which is when you describe your life and how you were essentially living the Pakistani dream and then some ke you were on TV, you were in a think tank, you were writing, you had a life in Islamabad, in Lahore, you had a home, you had beautiful carpets, you had everything, and it went like overnight it all finished. um and that's still sort of shaking me up. Okay, it's not, a lot of people come to the US, and I've interviewed other people in the podcast, और जो मेरे जैसे भी होते हैं कि जो आ जाते हैं अमेरिका में, प्यार के पीछे आया था, my begum was here, and मुझे बट मुझे ये आर्टिफिशियल सी लाइफ लगती थी. आई वाज लाइक कि नहीं, बस आई एम हियर फॉर अ कपल ऑफ इयर्स, वापस पाकिस्तान जाना है, वापस पाकिस्तान जाना है. आई वाज वन ऑफ दोस्त कि वो वापस पाकिस्तान जाने का वक्त नहीं आया और अब इधर ही रह गए. लेकिन आपके लिए जो ये ट्रांजिशन थी, मतलब ये तो एक वैसे ही डिफिकल्ट ट्रांजिशन है मूविंग फ्रॉम पाकिस्तान टू अमेरिका, लेकिन आपके लिए एक इतनी अच्छी जिंदगी बनी हुई थी और वो सब आपके सामने कोलैप्स हुई ओवरनाइट, एंड देन यू स्टार्टेड फ्रॉम जीरो. And that to me, and me, I used to follow you, and follow you publicly, and I never saw this. मतलब आपने लिखा था, लेकिन I never saw
Yeah, I
the
mean,
pain of how profound this
it
was.
was very profound. It was so profound, and I'll tell you, and it still is in a way. But Bilal, the thing is that I, of course, now it's been a decade almost, and now I can reflect and I see maybe also culturally we are attuned to the idea of kismat and fate.
Mm,
Certain things naseeb mein likha hota hai. So, I tell myself that.
mm-hmm,
But honestly, it was like a real and the most as so look, the first thing is that trauma that I talked about, the
mm-hmm,
guilt that I was survivor's guilt, to
mm-hmm,
use in the popular
mm-hmm.
parlance.
Yeah.
And then of course leaving the country,
Mm-hmm,
leaving behind my parents,
mm-hmm,
leaving all that I had like achieved. In my view,
mm-hmm,
I'd achieved
mm-hmm,
quite a bit by the time I was
mm-hmm,
40, and I was happy and proud of my achievements, and also the fact that I was exactly doing because ye wo age hoti hai. Because in your 20s, you are impressionable, you are swayed. In your 30s, you look at your colleagues and you look at other people. Oh, that person is doing that. That person has that car, that house, that
mm-hmm,
money, that
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
partner or whatever. A- At in your 40s, you start knowing yourself.
mm-hmm,
And so I kind of understood what makes me happy,
mm-hmm,
and by then I had sort of
mm-hmm,
strive to achieve that, and then it goes away. So that, and then leaving, and then of course what you just mentioned, I didn't want to mention that because obviously that would be akin to blowing my own trumpet. Was the fact, Bilal, that it was actually starting from zero,
mm-hmm,
ground zero, in the sense that I did not even have a work visa. So first
mm-hmm,
I had to get a J visa, which is a scholar visa, to work for that think tank, and but of course they helped me, and then a lot of people helped me out. Dr. Muid Yusuf was at
mm-hmm,
USIP there, who was such an important. I of course had known him from Islamabad.
mm-hmm,
I mean, I wouldn't have claimed then we were like pals or friends or whatever, but we knew
mm-hmm,
each other, and he sort of was very helpful
mm-hmm,
in getting that facilitated and all
mm-hmm,
of that. So I got that visa, and then of course finding this job, which was a 2 year
mm-hmm,
gig, and then after 2 years, and then within those 2 years, I also found a teaching position at Cornell University in their
mm-hmm,
public policy department. So by within years, I had two jobs going on,
mm-hmm,
and I still
mm-hmm,
had an affiliation with the Friday Times in Pakistan, and
mm-hmm,
later on that turned into an affiliation with Daily Times because the
mm-hmm.
publishers called me and they wanted me to take over the paper, which I initially thought, how would I do it, remotely, and then so in a way, I'm very proud of myself that I actually managed that, sitting far away, using technology, of course, changing my lifestyle by waking up at 6 a.m. in the morning. I'm never
Yeah,
a morning person, but now life
yeah.
has pushed me. So, now I'm up at 6 so that, between 6 and 9 in the morning here, I can finish a lot of this stuff. So
Yeah.
it's become a habit. But so that struggle, that hard work
Mhm.
was also something that, was ongoing. So I got so embroiled in that
Mm.
that your initial question, when did I choose, when did I decide to
Yeah,
stay on, it has somewhere gotten lost in the
yeah.
maze and maze of those events, right?
Wow.
And but then the other thing that happened was also, I'll tell you the other driver now that
Mhm.
you asked me, was the fact that my son then moved, was with me in Ithaca, and he went to school there, and then he went
Mm.
to high school. And, that was a community. It's a very unique community. It's a very progressive town, very
Mhm.
accepting people of immigrants, of
Mhm.
persons of color, as they call it in
Mhm.
America.
Mhm.
And And so my son got really adjusted and was very happy. Now I was also feeling that, I've already moved my children so
Yeah.
many times. Now, if for another move would be just too much. So I said, okay, this is the time, maybe wait for him to finish his high school,
Mm-hmm.
get into
Mm-hmm.
college. And so, all these things were like
Yeah.
working. So, but anyway, I'm I'm glad I decided that because, uh to me, the philosophy of life, I mean, among many philosophies of life, is
Mm-hmm.
also to enhance the experience of living, the
Mm-hmm.
range of your experiences,
Yeah.
range of your knowledge, the range of your of understanding the world, and
Mm-hmm.
in places in multicultural places and diverse places like academic campuses,
Mm-hmm.
college towns, or New York City,
Yeah.
you are familiar with, you get that experience,
Yeah.
and it's a unique thing.
Yeah.
So in a way, I do feel privileged, but but I do want to highlight through this podcast because Bilal, what we haven't really touched is
Mm.
what was happening in Pakistan,
Yeah.
and what was being said about me.
Mm-hmm.
So from 2014 to all these years, while I was struggling, I'll tell you, there was a group of people who said, "Oh, he made up this fake attack to get asylum in the U.S."
Yeah.
So which
Yeah.
is a common thing.
Yeah.
He's a CIA asset. He was planted in Pakistan
Wow.
by them. The third type was, oh, what's the threat to him? It was just an attack. You should come back. So there was, in fact, right when I moved to DC, there was a woman I knew
Mm-hmm.
in the circle of acquaintances, friend of my friends,
Yeah.
and and she made this. I mean, she didn't say it to me, but she said it to me after we were together somewhere, and she made this remark. She said, "Oh well, uh, why is he making this as an excuse to stay here? This was right.
Wow.
He should just go back to work." And I faced that, but then the other thing. So then the layers of
Mm-hmm.
trauma, and it's a good exercise I'm doing for
Yeah.
the things I have to write in my book. Is also you lose friends in this
Mm-hmm.
because your old associations, your old
Yeah.
associates, your acquaintances, your friends, through these cataclysmic changes in your place of residence in your
Yeah.
life. So I have lost many friends as well, very dear
Mm-hmm.
friends.
Yeah.
Either through distance or whatever, through whatever,
Mm-hmm.
it has,
It happens. Yeah.
it happens. And it's also, in a way, very sad. It is
Mm-hmm.
very sad. And so I'm just, so when I used to read these comments on Twitter or Facebook or other places, so that would also fuel my anxiety. And I would say, why do I have to go back to face this? So, that's what
Yeah.
one of my friends used to say. Look at this comment. This is where you want to go back to. So, so there were all these triggers happening. Anyway, I think I've taken too long to your
Nay, this
interesting
is
question.
this that makes me really angry, and I was
I mean,
almost
you
afraid
know
to
it.
ask that
You
question.
face social media bullshit as well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you are familiar with
I
that.
know it's what it's like, but matlab, to do it when you're struggling in life, like in a moment where you've literally been shot at, and then to say that you asked for that bullet and that you're faking it and that you're doing it for a visa when you're struggling to get that visa to make a life, matlab,
Yeah.
it's just it's terrible. Joe, and now I'm going to project on you. I'm going to psychoanalyze you, even though I'm not a licensed therapist. But जब मैंने आपको initially पूछा था कि how you identify yourself, and you said Lahori and not Pakistani,
No,
but
no,
you had served in
Pakistan
the
is also
Pakistani.
part of
वो
that.
भी Pakistani is a part of it.
Hmm.
Uh, do you think all this trauma that you had a role to play in elevating your Lahori identity at subliminal level, and sort of allowing you to disassociate a little bit with what Pakistan did to you, perhaps even the deep state did to you, and to your life, to your beautiful life that you had built like brick by brick. Even though, and I'm going to ask you this, like, you still love Pakistan, like, what is your relationship with Pakistan today? But do you think it had an effect on like fundamentally changing your identity and your outlook in terms of how you define yourself? Like, do you think that's part of the trauma?
So I'll be very honest with you. Initially, for a couple of years, I was very angry. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the reasons. So, what I haven't really mentioned, Bilal, so far is that for almost 5 years, I did not go back to Pakistan.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and I mean, a little less than 5 years,
Mm-hmm.
more than 4 years. And so I did not go back. Well, partly I was afraid,
Mm-hmm.
partly I was worried that,
Mm-hmm.
something might happen or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And partly I was also angry, you know. But there was also a type of reflection. So, what the deep state may or may not, I'm not sure. I don't have evidence, Bilal. As you
Mm-hmm.
know, you can
Yeah.
never, you can only make conjectures.
Yeah.
What I then processed was that, my country, my people are far bigger an entity than just these militant groups or government agencies
Mm-hmm.
or
Mm-hmm.
agencies, right? So
Yeah.
if you were to look at the universe, there's small dots here.
Mm-hmm.
There.
Yeah.
They have some
Yeah.
have more power than the others.
Yeah.
So obviously, Bilal, I love my country to the bits,
Mm-hmm.
and of course I love Lahore as I started off with.
Mm-hmm.
And I love, and I'll be very honest with you, I love South Asia as well.
Mm-hmm.
I've been to Bangladesh so many times. I love Bangladesh, at the Bengali cuisine. I love its green fields. I love
Mm-hmm.
India. I'll be honest, with you. I love Delhi despite the fact it's all polluted and this and
Mm-hmm.
that. I love
Yeah.
Agra. I
Mm-hmm.
love Ajmer. That's
Mm-hmm.
I'm a devotee of Moinuddin Chishti.
Mm-hmm.
So I cannot. So in a way, I feel that I can easily hold multiple identities
Yeah.
without any particularism. Of course, my
Mm-hmm.
core identities are Lahori and Pakistani, and that is
Mm-hmm.
immutable.
Yeah.
That does not stop me. So I love
Yeah.
New York City as well.
Mm.
I'll be
Yeah.
very honest with you, and I love
Mm-hmm.
hikes and beautiful mountains and waterfalls in the U.S. and the
Mm-hmm.
desert and the Grand Canyon where I've been to all these
Mm-hmm.
places. But of course, the core identity is there. So
Mm-hmm.
I am no longer angry. I'm no longer angry even at it is only going to hurt me. So that is what, uh,
Mm-hmm.
because you were trying to psychoanalyze me. So, I've been through therapy. So for at least 5 years,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
what I've learned and what I've processed during that time is the fact that, I, I have to think of forgiveness. I
Mm-hmm.
have to think of moving on,
Mm-hmm.
looking ahead. Dealing trauma doesn't go away; it stays
Yeah.
with you. Bad memories don't go away; they are
Yeah.
somewhere locked in your
Mm-hmm.
system. But you have
Mm-hmm.
to move on. You have to make
Mm-hmm.
something out of your life, and
Yeah.
that is what I have struggled to do. And I think to a good, reasonable degree, I've achieved it. So.
Mm-hmm.
After almost 5 years, I then returned to Pakistan. Of course,
Mm-hmm.
before going,
Mm-hmm.
I, spoke to my colleagues in the civil service,
Mm-hmm.
media,
Mm-hmm.
in here and there.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, I went there very quietly for the first time. I even had a bodyguard, believe
Mm-hmm.
it or not,
Mm-hmm.
or for the first visit, because there was
Mm-hmm.
anxiety, psychological
Yeah.
anxiety. But then on my second visit, I disregarded that. And I said
Mm-hmm.
that, it's okay. Life goes
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
And because, so, your home country is also like your parents.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
now for me, Pakistan is, all this
Yeah.
identity,
Yeah.
stuff that I've been abstract stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
there's a very concrete person, just like a flesh and blood
Mm-hmm.
representation of that identity and of that link are my parents. They
Mm-hmm.
both live there. They're aging. They need
Mm-hmm.
medical attention. They have
Mm-hmm.
frequent visits to doctors.
Yeah.
All three of us are here
Mm-hmm.
in the US. So now,
Mm-hmm.
now what we try and do is that we take turns,
Mm-hmm.
and I go there at least once or twice a year. Of course, I go there, and it's also a chance to reconnect with the city, with the
Mm-hmm.
places, with old
Yeah.
friends, etc. But and of course, some of the work that I do still do with the media.
Mm-hmm.
But primarily, it's paying homage to my parents and my land.
Yeah. That's beautiful. अब मुझे आखिरी एक दो सवाल पूछता हूँ on this, and I want to move to some lighter hearted stuff because this is quite deep. But मुझे बताएं कि what is home for you now? I wanted to compliment you. In fact, I did before we hit record. You've just moved to Manhattan. You've already sort of set up a beautiful place. It seems like you got some carpets. I don't know if they're the carpets from your Lahore home or Islamabad home. You've got some painting. You've built a life here. You've sort of Ithaca ke andar bhi, I'm sure some of this comes from there. Does this feel like home? Like, does this feel like what it felt like in Lahore? Does it feel slightly artificial? Does it feel just like home? Like, what's the feeling?
You know, this is such a tough question because at one level I can say, yeah, it feels like home. But actually, I'll be honest with you, it's not. It's not anymore. And, and that is the other problem of moving away of all these transitions is that you lose the idea of home. So when I go back to Pakistan, to my home, it doesn't, I know I'm there for limited time. So I'm getting things done. I am with my parents. I'm getting our house fixed or repaired or whatever. But of course, there's an attachment to it, but it doesn't feel like home, right? And when I come,
Even Pakistan doesn't feel like home.
no,
Basically, even your home doesn't feel like
no, it
home.
doesn't. It doesn't. So
That's
this
the irony. Yeah.
so homelessness, जो है ना, of course, this is a privileged homelessness.
Yes.
Unfortunately, we have real homeless people
Mhm.
in America,
Mhm.
in LA, and New York, and
Yeah.
Bombay, and Calcutta, and Karachi. पुलों के नीचे बेचारे रह
Mhm.
ये. It sounds really odd of me to complain about it or mourn about it, but there's a sense of dislocation, and there's a permanent. So what I've also learned, Bilal, and what I've also done in the past few years is also to deal with that situation and make peace with it. And make peace with it because I'll tell you now that you've asked me, so as I told you, I can elaborate on all these issues because
Mhm.
these questions that you're raising, I've been thinking about them and writing about them
Mhm.
actually for my
Mhm.
book. So, I once calculated before I moved to Ithaca. So one of the other reasons you said, why did you stay on?
Mhm.
So before Ithaca, I had moved 13 homes in 1 decade. Okay?
Wow.
13 places of residence, you know, all over the world. I, and when I arrived in Ithaca, I was so effing exhausted. And I'm
Mhm.
like, I'm not going anywhere for at least 2 3 years.
I'm done.
बहुत हो गया.
Uh-huh.
Even in DC, when I came in 2014, first I
Mhm.
stayed with my sister. Then I
Mhm.
moved to an apartment in Roslyn. Then I moved to a house where close to my son's school. Then I moved to
Mhm.
another place, and
Mhm.
all four movements and transitions in about 13 months. Just imagine, 14 months,
Wow.
four places to live. So so this is not new. This is not about moving to America. This
Mhm.
state has already been with me. So it's my life history, it's my story. And so, and obviously it used to worry me, it used to haunt me at times.
Mhm.
But now I've sort of made peace with that, and I'm always ready for change. So I'm like a part of me lives in those boxes that we often use for packing.
Yeah, I am just so stirred by you saying, I don't feel at home, even at home, like even in Pakistan, even here. And that's really the irony of this transitionary state that we're in. One wonders if there's ever an end to it. And it's actually, and we'll come to this, like the end comes with our children. Our children will one day feel at home somewhere, but
Yeah.
we might not. मुझे याद है लम्स के अंदर एक लड़का आई वाज अ सिटी बॉय अच्छा मुझे तो लाइक एंड आई वाज बोर्न इन कराची तो मुझे तो कराची भी एंड देन आई ग्रू अप इन रियाद सो मुझे तो कुछ कभी भी कुछ घर नहीं लगा लेकिन जब मैं लम्स में था उसके साथ तो आई वाज लाइक ही वाज फ्रॉम अ रूरल एरिया आई एम लाइक हाउ डज इट फील टू गो बैक होम लाइक ही यूज्ड टू गो बैक टू हिज विलेज एंड ही इज लाइक आई फील लाइक connected to the land. I feel connected to the roots. And मतलब पता नहीं क्या देहाती बंदा बात कर रहा है मुझे तो कुछ समझ नहीं आया कि I'm like what do you mean like connected to the land, connected to the roots. And now I get the power of people who know where they come from. You know how racists here are like go back to where you came from. There's something about like knowing where you come from and feeling centered and rooted in a place that then that feeling you continue to chase, and people who've, been through journeys or been immigrants, like they lose that sense, or at least they have a part of their life where they lose that sense. मुझे एक और चीज, if you're comfortable, the last sort of question on this piece is about your kids. Do you feel like, what do you feel their relationship with Pakistan will be like, given everything that you've been through? Do you think now they are Pakistani Americans and more Americans? Do you have a viewpoint on that? Do you want them to go back and stay connected? Do you want them to stay here? Like, because that's when it gets really real, in terms of, how your real feelings come out.
So also now the thing is that my kids, Bilal, regularly go to Pakistan. So that is something that has happened, and I think it has happened for good, because they've been growing up. As they've been growing up, they've been, well, primarily my son has primarily grown up here in the US.
Yeah.
But he has been going regularly back to Pakistan, and I think they have a very comfortable relationship. And I'm very happy that they have grown up with these dual and multiple identities. So they are equally at home when they go to Pakistan, and they're equally at home where they are. So in a way, they have a different range of choices that perhaps I did not, or maybe you did not when you 15 or 14 or 13 or until you moved to Lums and to Lahore. So you had this other experience. But I think going back to what you were saying earlier, I had a point to make, and which was basically about this, the important part is that, not feeling home at home either, is the fact that initially I did. So for the first time after all these years, when I went to Pakistan, I was like, I immediately went and I said, okay, I'm home. But what you realize soon, or within a few days, that the others look at you as an expat. So they say, आप तो अमेरिका में रहते हैं, आपने तो वापस चले जाना है, आपका तो ये होता है, आप तो वहीं पे ही हैं. So in a way, you have already been chopped off from the daily reality and experience. Okay, so when I went there for the first time, it did not really hit me. I said, "Chacha, theek hai, I'll readjust or whatever." Second time, it became sharper and acuter. The third, okay, and then there are also these obligatory things. People say, "अच्छा, आप आए हुए हैं तो आपके लिए dinner पे चलते हैं." So all of that. So a bit of spontaneity goes away. But, of course, it's always great to meet our dear friends and connect with them. So it's also how you viewed, and that impacts you. So I did not really feel as an expat. I still don't feel as an expat. I mean, I feel that, I can happily live in these two places, because my mind lives in Pakistan and part of my body lives here, and and they're at peace. I haven't got I haven't got schizophrenic, right? And because I can divide my brain and my day, right? But a lot of people there do see me as the outsider, and I've always felt that outsider syndrome in my life. That's a long story. That's for another podcast. We'll stop here.
I'm going to challenge you on one thing that you said here. आप कह रहे हैं कि आपकी mind और heart जो है वो शायद पाकिस्तान में और आपकी body इधर है, and you're not schizophrenic and everything is fine. I think we pretend that everything is fine. I think कि जब आपका mind और heart कहीं और हो और आपकी body कहीं और हो, I lived with this for like a couple of years, my first few years in the US, and so मेरी सारी quote unquote like public life की investment पाकिस्तान में थी. Like I was, tweeting, writing, my heart, like everything was bleeding for Pakistan. But मैं physically इधर था. And there was such a disassociation. This was pre-COVID, but it felt like America was virtual reality. It was like living in the metaverse. मतलब it wasn't real. जबकि इधर जो मैं जिंदगी में investments कर सकता था, इधर जो मैं अपने लिए जिंदगी बना सकता था, वो मैंने कभी बनाई नहीं. And now I'm beginning the journey of building that. ये podcast is like a bridge, जिस तरह पुराने पाकिस्तान और नए पाकिस्तान के between bridge है, ये पुराने बिलाल और नए बिलाल के between एक bridge है कि अब अमेरिका के अंदर एक community बनानी है, एक वो बनाना है. And so it's interesting, and this is going to be my question to you is like, I felt like Naya Daur, the birth of Naya Daur, was like your way to stay connected to Pakistan in some ways, and to relive a part of that beautiful life that you had constructed in
Yeah,
Pakistan, but based out of America. And but it was still entirely for Pakistan. In some strange way, it's going to pull you even closer and closer to Pakistan. And right now, you're not feeling it, which is great. And I hope you never feel this. But at some point, it's going to come back to bite and say, "कि मैं अमेरिका में I made a physical choice not to live in Pakistan, but मैंने अपने दिल और दिमाग को कभी इजाजत नहीं दी पाकिस्तान से exile लेने की." I mean, this is me way psychoanalyzing you, but
I
just
think
some
no. I
thoughts.
think this is really interesting what you're saying, and in a way, I think it makes a lot of sense what you're saying. But I think because Bilal, I told you about my life history.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, this straddling between continents,
Mm-hmm.
between geographies, between boundaries, between contexts, I have actually kind of trained myself. It did not come naturally,
Mm-hmm.
but it came, and I'll tell you when it really started to take shape. Not when I was a student, I lived many years abroad, but when I worked in Kosovo, that was again for a couple of years. And I think that is when I started negotiating this multiple sort of, lives in a
Mm-hmm.
same. So in a way, it is not that
Yeah.
distressing. But yes, part of, doing Neador or still being affiliated with Pakistani media and writing there
Mm-hmm.
is definitely a way to relive that and stay
Mm-hmm.
connected. But I think part of that is also my, how do I put it? My response to the forcible silencing.
Mm-hmm.
There was an effort to
Yeah.
push me out,
Mm-hmm.
and and after, and I said, I'm not going to be pushed out. I'm not a
Mm-hmm.
pushover.
Yeah.
So, like it or not, so I'll be there. So in a way,
Yeah.
in a way, all mixed of things. But you have given me good points to think about.
Yeah. I've written half your book here. I better get some royalty. No. But
Yes, yeah.
um अच्छा अब आखिरी last two questions. One of the things I'm still sort of thinking about is, your life and how it deconstructs entirely overnight, and then you build it from the ashes of nothing. And the mental trauma of that, not just physically rebuilding it, but the mental trauma of all of that. And one of the secrets to why I think you were able to do that is your remarkable either zest for life or work ethic. I don't know which one it is. And आपकी personal identities को हमने dissect किया, but your professional identities are also equally fascinating. And maybe we'll have to have you back on the podcast when your book is launching to to get through this one also. But I want to briefly touch on it. You do so many things, like you're like doing, आप बात कर रहे थे in your 30s, you're comparing with other people. And so, like, now that I hear all of this, I'm like, my God, look at everything Raza's done and look at what I've done. Like, there is so
Don't
much
don't think like
that
that.
you
Don't think like that.
that you've done. ये कहाँ से आती है आपकी drive? Because I think it's a core part of your resilience and your ability to rebuild yourself. But आपका बचपन से ये था, and you don't come off as a type A person. You don't, but you, mashallah, like managed to do so much and create so much impact in so many different vectors. ये कैसे करते हैं? Like, what's the secret to this?
So I think part of it has to do, Bilal, with as I told you, the zest for life is a good term that you use. But this whole quest. I mean, to me, I think life is. I mean, I take life as a unique one-time opportunity to explore its frontiers and to undergo experiences because you don't know how long it is for. You don't know when it's going to end. So this I learned when I was younger, and as and through reading, I used to be an avid reader. I struggle with my reading, but I used to read a lot of literature and poetry and fiction and this and that, everything under the sun. And very soon I realized that actually there's no meaning of life. The only meaning of life is exploring life. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
for following that path, I've been trying to do that throughout. And even now, and then of course second thing that comes, that's more of a skill, and that is time management that comes with time, with age and all of that and experiences. So now, I divide my work days, I divide my weekends, because and I do want to now include more leisure and more free time and self-care time, because I've become too much of a workaholic. But I think if I'd not done that, I would have not known how is it to teach, how is
Mm-hmm.
it to write, how
Yeah.
is it to speak, how is it to
Yeah.
face a big town hall, how is it to write a report, how is it to
Yeah.
so all these things I feel the way blessed and privileged, and that I've been able to live through those experiences. Of course, I want to do more things in life as I'm growing older. But I certainly think that this comes from this has to do with the worldview, with the
Yeah.
worldview and the zest or the passion that you talked about.
Wow. One of the years that I was going through midlife crisis, मुझे हर साल एक midlife crisis होती है, but one year my outcome of it was like the purpose of life is to live as many different lives as you can in a single life.
Absolutely,
And
so well put, so well put. Same.
and बिल्कुल, and मैं अब आपकी ज़िंदगी देखता हूँ, and we talked about this, and I feel like कि आपने इतनी सारी ज़िंदगियाँ जो हैं वो एक ही ज़िंदगी के अंदर जी है, and instead of exhausting you, it's energized you. कोशिश की है, but बहुत अच्छी वो की है. तो अब आप, now knowing all of this and learning all of this, by the way, another thing that I say, like one of our superpowers as immigrants is the ability to travel through time. क्योंकि हम अगर कोई पिछली सिटी में जाते हैं जहाँ हम जा चुके होते हैं, तो we can live a different age, we can live a different life stage. तो अब आपने इतनी सारी जिंदगियां जी ली हैं, अब आपको अगली जिंदगी कौन सी जीनी है, इन द सेंस कि अब आप पाकिस्तान से अमेरिका आ गए हैं, तो अब आप जब देखते हैं अपनी आगे की जिंदगी, and this journey of all these different identities that you've taken, what does Raza Rumi, now that he's learned everything from this vantage point, like where does he go next, like what does he do next?
Well, first of all, let me correct you. I haven't learned everything, unfortunately. I still want to learn more, and but Bilal, what I really want, I have a few book projects lined up,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and they have been getting delayed and delayed because sadly, writing does not pay for your bills, does not pay your kids' fees, expenses,
Mm-hmm.
you know, or etc. So I had to continue working until for some
Mm-hmm.
time. But my ideal future plan is to finish my book projects. I have some books under my belt, but the books that I've been working on have to be completed and published. And I know these days a lot of people have stopped reading books or whatever. But the thing is that I really want to. I mean, writing is something that really keeps me centered,
Mm-hmm.
and it's both a challenge, it's both and a pleasure and a therapeutic process.
Mm-hmm.
So that is what I really want to do in the short term, I mean, short to medium term.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I don't know. In the long run, as Keynes said, we all are dead, right?
बिल्कुल. Well, what a fascinating conversation, and I really hope that you do write, क्योंकि आपकी, once we're gone in the long term, our books, our words, our thoughts are the only thing that sort of follow us and still continue to make an impact long after we're gone. मुझे बताएं, is there anything about your identity that we didn't cover, or anything that surprised you as we talked about a lot of the different things that we talked about?
No, I think you've explored almost all the various facets, and I think I've also, then some of the questions were really tough, but I think you've covered a good lot. Bilal, तुम उसको edit कर लेना. Let's end, right?
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल, तो अब हम एंड करते हैं. I'm gonna stop the record button, but then stay on. I want to talk to you for 2 minutes. एक मैं आपकी बुक को plug दे दूं even before it's out, but Raza's book looks fascinating, so we can't wait, Raza, for your book to come out, and you've got to come back as soon as the book's ready.
Thank you.